You know, it's always a good day when you get a conversation with Steve Hawkins. He's next up on our summer access here throughout 2025, the summer of 2025. Coach Hawk, it's hard to believe that we are here. It has gone by already fast in the middle of week 3 as we catch up with you. But that's kind of normal, right? Things just keep getting quicker each year in college basketball. I'm sure you're involved in.
Well, it's a little slower than it was this time last year.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, we got here and right now I didn't know where my parking spot was, let alone we were trying to figure out our players' names and everything else. So it's a little bit slower, but yes, it's still in a time where there's NIL, the transfer portal. There's so much to keep track of now than there used to be for us coaches. And so the summers do seem to get, or the springs seem to get a little bit shorter than they used to. But that's okay. I get antsy anyway.
You've always been a connected guy, so I'm sure your off seasons you're always spending time on the phone. I feel like every day when I would see you, it would be hard to even try to have a conversation with you because you're on the phone with somebody. And that's just kind of the day and age you're in when you talk about the transfer portal, when you're also trying to find the right pieces for this group. What to you helps you cut through all the noise and help you make sure that whatever time you are spending is valuable time on whatever that is, gathering information, finding intel that has you and allows you to find good fits?
Yeah, I think I mean, with experience or with the more years you have in it, there's more experience involved. And you hear things along the way, the mistakes you make along the way, you hope you learn from them. And I learned, it was a long time ago, I still work at it, but compartmentalizing. And so if you come into the day and you don't know what you're going to do, because there's emergencies and not necessarily big ones, but there's things that are just going to pop up. You could have a great plan and then a kid walks into your office and say, hey, Coach, I need to talk to you about something. It could be family related. Well, you got to drop everything. Or it could just be, let's watch some film. You got to take the time. And so, prioritizing your day and then compartmentalizing. All right. For me, if I'm making one recruiting call, the one basketball call, one call to an agent, I'm bouncing all over the place. So, all right, today's or this portion of the day is the time to connect with maybe other college coaches. So let me take the next 2 or 3 hours to talk to them. All right, I got to call high school coaches, whatever it may be. Recruits, whatever it may be, just compartmentalize so you don't get disorganized. Otherwise it just becomes what Coach Wooden used to call activity without achievement. You're really, really active doing a bunch of things, but what are you achieving? You got to try and stay away from that.
One of the areas this offseason, you in your promotion within the program is, of course, taking over. I don't know if you necessarily want to say general manager title, but as you said, there's a lot of conversations that you have with players, agents, obviously the players themselves. What have you found as a guy who's been in college basketball for such a long time? What are the biggest challenges in, if that is an area that has changed, how you've tried to adapt to make sure that you in this role are the best one that Southern can have to help out this team and program in those needed areas that are essential now in terms of your roster management?
Yeah, you said the key word there, adapt. And you hear college coaches talk about it right now. Everybody seems to be up in arms about NIL and transfer portal. It's here to stay, and so it's not. We can disagree with it or agree with it. And when I say we, I'm talking about fans as well as coaches. We can have an opinion about it, but it's our jobs. I'm talking about down here on the floor, not the fans, but I'm talking about down here on the floor. It's my job to adapt and to try and figure out, stay up with current trends. How do we, what's the best way to be efficient with our resources as well as with our time? And so the adapt part is critical in this, and I think that really, you mentioned connect in the previous question, and I think that that's a big thing for me is to stay in touch with other college coaches that I know. Hey, what are you guys doing there? We all have questions that pop up, and I'll get phone calls too, from other college coaches that'll be like, hey, Hawk, what are you doing? What are you guys doing there with this? And it could be anything. It could be a summer workout. How are you guys handling workouts, team versus individual? How are you, what about NIL? Do you talk to players? Do you not? How much time are you spending with agents? Whatever it may be, you
Yeah.
just have to adapt.
How do you approach, and it's not just you, but as a staff, and it was one of the questions I had to Coach Nagy when we started off the summer, of determining the value for a player. To me, you've always, as a coach, you value pieces, you value parts of their games, and there's always just that kind of gut feel of this person is going to fit within our program. But now you add the money piece into it. What's the biggest challenge in terms of finding whatever the word is, a structure or a formula of, hey, this is how we're going to figure out how we put a price tag on it, because it's different for everybody and it's different for every program, not even from a resources standpoint, just what do you value?
Yeah, it's a huge part of things. Last year I think we had a conversation about it, Luke. We came in and we had 3 players when we got here, and we were allowed 13 scholarships at that point. It's moved up to 15 scholarships now, and so we had to get 10 players in last year. And we spent an incredible amount of time in the film room watching film. And if there was a kid that looked like he was good enough for us, we needed it. It didn't matter whether it was a point guard or whether it was a 5. We needed a little bit of everything with just the 3 guys we had back. And so we spent some time talking to coaches. Hey, what kind of kid is he? All of these things. But at the same time we were going through that, we did not have as much time as we would like because Coach Nagy and I really discussed this, and we've known each other for a long time, and he's run a similar program to what I tried to run at Western Michigan, in that culture really matters. And it's not just we've passed up on players. This is one of the things I'm really proud of with this roster, is we passed up on some players that might have been a little bit more talented than somebody we brought in, maybe. But that they weren't our kind of kid. They weren't what we think would be great in the locker room. Kids that are as interested in being a great teammate as they are a great player. Kids that would cheer for their teammates, as opposed to wishing that they would do poorly so that they could play. I'm not saying that's what we had last year. I'm just saying those are the kind of questions and those are the kind of things that we look for when evaluating talent. Now, in terms of placing a value on it, I don't think it's much different because, let's face it, what we have here really is kind of professional sports now. So, what a professional model would look like, whether it's a football, baseball, or basketball franchise, is what are your needs? And if you have a glaring need, then you're going to put some resources towards that need. Again, this past year, we still had to bring in quite a few guys, but the point guard spot was glaring. We lost Elijah at the beginning of the year, 5 games into the year last year, and he was our leading scorer. People forget that, including ourselves.
Yeah.
We forget that at times. If we had kept Elijah, could that have made the difference in 3, 4, 5 ball games? We think so. But we did not want to. Next thing we know, we've got Moo playing the point guard spot, and that was after trying Mayo, as well as Drew, as well as Sheridan. And so we ended up settling on Moo, and so we did not want to be back in that position this year at one of what is probably the 2 most important spots at the point guard spot. So we really tried to address that.
You brought up just the feel in terms of wanting to get the right guys in. It's as understandable as you said. Look, we just needed to find bodies a year ago, and that's part of it. What was the most honest, transparent response that you guys as a staff said, this is where we maybe didn't get it right last year, we need to approach this year? This is a main focus for us.
I think it's culture. It's the culture piece, and specifically energy. You have to bring energy. There's energy givers and energy vampires. And in this world, in a family, in a business, corporation, and on a team. There's people that when you walk into the room, we've all seen it. The people that might be watching this interview right now, We all know it. You know, whether it's at work or it could be somebody in your family when they walk in for Thanksgiving, you're like, oh, my gosh, and then there's other people. It's like, hey, Uncle Joey's here, and everybody's happy to see him. Which one are you going to be? Who are you going to be? Because it's a choice. It really is a choice. And we wanted guys that are going to be sunshine when they walk into a room, that are happy when they walk around, that are guys that when they get up in the morning, they're in a good mood. It takes something to knock them off their mark, to get them into a bad mood, as opposed to waking up in a bad mood and bringing that cloud over your head into whatever it is we're doing out here. Again, it's not saying that everybody was like that last year, but without question, we needed kids that had the volume turned up more just in their DNA. And if we had those energy guys that came bouncing in, we always felt, Coach Nagy talks about this all the time, it's easier to dial a guy back than it is to turn him up. We wanted guys that were turned up, had a really high motor from the jump, whether it be the classroom, whether it be life, or whether it be the basketball court. We wanted guys that were really high energy people, and we think that we got that right this time.
That feeds into where I want to direct. Obviously, last year for you, second half of the season, took over as the defensive coordinator. And after those first 5 games of league play, you really saw the team make strides. No, it didn't ultimately get to the level you wanted to, but there were no doubt strides made. When Saluki fans watch this team this year, where do you want them to go? Wow, this is much improved, but also different and improved.
Yeah, I think, in all my years, I spent a lot of time coaching in Illinois when I was at Quincy University, and a lot of time recruiting in Illinois when I was at Western Michigan. And then we played SIU when I was at Western Michigan. And the SIU brand and the tradition here is steep. And you go back to when CeeLo was here and Coach Weber was here and Matt Painter was here and the whole floor burned and they had a brand which was when you play these guys, you're in for a dogfight. No pun intended. Maybe pun intended.
Yeah.
You're in for a real fight. And that's something that we want everybody to see. We want them to be proud of the way, the one thing I found in living down here, everybody works hard and plays hard, and that's what we want to do. That, we want to represent the blue collar nature of our part of the state, because they appreciate it. They appreciate guys that dive on the floor for loose balls. They appreciate and they're knowledgeable basketball fans, and so when they see a bench that's up cheering for everybody, when their own teammates dive on the floor for loose balls, or the effort is there, when we're filling lanes on a fast break and we're playing the pace we want to play, it's just playing harder, and the energy that's on the bench and that's out on the floor, that's what we want them to be proud of. That's what we want our guys to see.
One of the areas that's been so much fun watching the finals is you see a team like the Pacers that play with so much pace, but also defensively they get after you. And, of course, the OKC Thunder coach has brought up multiple times throughout practices already. He did today talking about Caruso and the important parts that he plays with those teams. When you think of how the Pacers have played, 94 feet, as soon as that ball's inbounded, you see guys right in your grill in terms of the pressure. You guys have preached pressure since you've gotten here. Where are you at in terms of that can be the visible signs that people will see in terms of the Saluki brand starting this year with your team?
Yeah, I think it starts in the recruiting process. I used to think, Luke, that recruiting was 90% sales and 10% research. Just put me when I was young and had blonde hair that was parted right down the middle and feathered back. Just put me in front of a kid and I'll talk him into coming to my school because I'm that good of a salesman and they're really going to like me. Yeah, and through experience, you find out that actually the recruiting process is probably closer to 90% research and 10% sales. And so when you're doing research, and you're talking to their AAU coaches and their high school coaches and the coaches that they play against and the kid himself, and is he making eye contact? Is there respect for family members? Is there respect for elders? We take on their visits, how do they treat the waiter, the waitress? Is it eye contact again? Is it yes, ma'am? No, ma'am. Excuse me. There's so many things that because believe it or not, it translates into points out here. It really does. What you care about, it just there's a self-respect that goes with it, and I learned a long time ago. We had fun with some of the guys that come into practice every day, and the old school up here that sit here and watch our practices a lot. And I always talked about back in the day it was a little bit more before some of the resources we have now that are more readily available. But I made it a point every time I went and watched a high school kid play, I made it a point to get to the janitor, because the janitor knows everything that is going on at that school. He is the proverbial fly on the wall. So I'd grab my popcorn and pop and, walk down towards him eventually and say, introduce myself. And, he would say casually, are you here? To see Luke play? Yeah, I'm here to see Luke play. And he'd say, yeah, that kid's something else. He helps. He's the last one in here, and he picks up the trash for me. He's just nicest kid in the world. I don't know if you know or not, but he mows his grandpa's lawn, once a week because his grandpa's elderly. It tells you a lot. There's been other conversations where you're here to see Luke play. Yeah, if that kid ever gets his head on straight, he's got a chance to be pretty good. And it's like, ooh, there's a red flag that just went up. And so that's part of research, transcripts, grades. It just shows that they care about themselves, and not necessarily. It's not all of it. It's just part of the picture, But I think that those are some of the things. It begins with the recruiting process, but the defensive, because that also will tell you a little bit about coachability, and some of the kids, and especially in today's culture where they're coming out of AAU ball, where they're going to play 3 games in a day sometimes. Where losing doesn't matter as much. You play a game at 9 o'clock in the morning and you lose, it doesn't matter. You go grab a bag full of McDonald's and you got another game at 2. And you just rack those. So winning and losing kind of gets blurred sometimes, which is what we don't want, once they get here. And so, again, part of the research there, but when we get them out here, then when we start talking about pressure and we start talking about high hands to check hand, that's a detail thing. And then when we start getting questions back, that's what I've loved about this group in the first couple of weeks here is they're asking questions because they genuinely want to learn. Why are we doing this? And we love questions. It's not just like I'm doing it, but also the why behind the how.
6 returners back. What are you impressed by? What is encouraging about those guys who know what it's like to be underneath you guys for a year and are back and now welcoming in a very talented group of newcomers and transfers?
Yeah, they're all willing to talk. Some of these guys were a little more silent last year, because it was such a weird feeling. It had been a while since we've all done it, but to have an entirely new team and an entirely new coaching staff, last year. So the players are kind of looking around like, who's going to step up and talk. We were all trying to get used to Coach Nagy and what does he really want, out of things. And so this year coming into it, the entire coaching staff returns. So we know we're a lot more comfortable with our terminology. We know what Coach Nagy means when he's talking about a Denver cut, or MIG. The fans may not know it, but we know it, and so we can teach it, and it just moves quick. And so I think that part of things is good. And these 6 guys that are returning now know that stuff too. So even though we'll talk about it, we teach it, when we start playing or when we start getting into drill work, if somebody does something wrong, you see somebody like Mayo or you see somebody like Rollins even, who came on stronger for us at the end of the year, grabbing somebody even like his brother, who's an older player, and a more veteran guy, saying, no, that's what this is. And they can talk a little bit more. So we have some coaches on the floor and the players, not just the coaches themselves.
Continuity You see it very important within our league. And it seems like the teams who have had most success, even Drake a year ago, even though most of them were transfers, they had that shared continuity with each other with Coach McCullum, of course, at their previous stop. Even though the whole team may not have that shared continuity, what do you believe gives this team an opportunity and a chance to be a team that can contend in the top half of this league?
Yeah, I think, the most important thing with any, again, we go back to the business world, whether it be a business or corporation or a team, it's talent acquisition. Without talent, I mean, we could have really coachable people, and we could have, I did a clinic not too long ago, and I asked these kids, and parents were in the stands, and I said, what's the most important thing that we are looking for as coaches? What do you think it is? And people with grades, attitude, respect, all these different things came up. I was like, no, can you play? It's talent first. Once it's talent, because all those other things, grades and coachability and attitude, I could also go get that off of a kid on the chess team. Yeah. He probably has the same thing. So it's, can you play? Now, after we figured out that can you play or not, and do we need that spot, then we get into the rest of the things. Then we get into those intangibles as we do the deeper dive. But I think from the returners and what they are doing now is that they are able to do a little bit better job of teaching the guys, so there's a little bit more continuity, and that part of things is made things a lot easier.
You brought it up very early, and why I thought it was an important thing that you brought up in terms of guys asking really good questions, being attentive. And when I make a statement like this, and I said this with Rollins earlier this week too, it almost comes across as speaking down about how it felt a year ago. But this is a completely different feel when you're in practice, and even just watching the guys and see how they interact with each other. As you say, you can sense the energy in here just being at a different level.
It's a whole different level. And again, it's not, you're right, because the kids that we had on the team last year, terrific kids. And so we're not speaking down about last year at all. But we did not know everything that we didn't know as much last year as we did this year.
Absolutely.
I think if we had kept everybody from last year coming into this year, I think that you still would have felt a whole different energy. We didn't, but if we had, I think that just the familiarity with everything just lends itself to being more confident, which lends itself to being louder, which lends itself to being a little bit more energetic. But now with some of those pieces gone, whether it be graduation or portal, the kids that we were able to bring in are the ones that we were able to identify and do the deep dive on. That's going to bring that energy as we talked about at the beginning of the interview.
Look, we can talk all day. Coach Hawk, we'll get you out of here on this note. In terms of defensively, so much of your team workouts this summer have pretty much all been defense.
Yeah.
There's not been much of an offensive focus. As you structure this summer, I know a lot of it can be, fundamentals in terms of the footwork, et cetera, of what you're doing right now and trying to get that carryover within all of these drills. But what have you focused of saying, hey, this is how we want to structure it? And also other coaches maybe you lean on throughout the summer too to give you some fresh ideas to bring that stuff back here to Carbondale.
Yeah, defend, rebound, run. That's our playing philosophy. Defend, rebound, run. If we walk into our locker room right now, you'll see it displayed big on a wall. Defend, rebound, and run. And those are aggression areas. And we want to play aggressive basketball. I talked about it last year shortly after Coach said, hey, I really want you to help out with the defense, we want to fill up their training room the next day. We want them to feel us when they're done with the game. I want them to look at film of us and say, oh, boy, we got to deal with this all night long. We want that to happen. We want to welcome that. We want to welcome the fight. And we want our guys with that mindset. And so Coach was really, we do feel good about the offensive ability. Coach has always said it. He says it in every recruiting meeting. Every kid we recruit said, if I were to just let you play and never said a thing about offense, you guys would find a way to score. But certain things have to be taught defensively. So offensively, we're going to give our guys a lot of freedom. Defensively, almost zero. We're going to be really connected, and on a string, depending on what defense we're in. We're going to switch up ball screen coverages. We're going to switch up whether or not we switch or stay with our man. We're going to switch up from whether or not we trap the post or don't trap the post, or where we come from. There's a lot of different things that when I got involved more defensively at the end of it, we wanted to win the battle of the timeout. That's something I've been big on my whole career is when there's a timeout coming out of it, let's do something a little different, because they're over there diagramming something. I don't want them to run it, this possession, so let's mix it up. So things like that. But for instance, to the second part of your question, and on Thursday, this weekend is an open recruiting period, but on Thursday I'm leaving to go to Houston. Got a recruiting event in Dallas, but I'm leaving on Thursday to go to Houston. Kelvin Sampson's been a friend of mine for a long time, going back. They've got one of the best defenses and have had one of the best defenses now for 3 or 4 years in a row. And I'm going to go down there and spend some time with him and watch workouts and talk with him and his staff so we can bring some of the ideas up this way. And yeah, you're right. I mean, as Coach Wooden, go back to Coach Wooden, he always said, when you're through learning, you're through. And that's what we want to continue to do here as coaches so that we can pass it down to the players.
Last thing.
Yeah, that's right.
What I love about my position and what you guys allow is really be that fly on the wall too, and to really see things and not necessarily document everything, but being able to watch and just listen in. I don't think Coach Nagy will mind if I share this story, but it was in St. Louis last year, and we were just wrapping up the event at Busch Stadium. And I was actually walking out with you and Coach Nagy, and there was a moment right when we were getting ready to go through Ballpark Village in that area, and he turns to you, and there was this genuine of, we got to get this thing rolling.
Yeah.
And I bring that story up and want to end it with you is just, it wasn't the first moment, but it was just a moment where I could see in Coach Nagy's eyes and your eyes of you just left an event where it wasn't the year that everybody wanted, but that room was packed. And you're going, if we get this to where we know we can get it, imagine that feeling. And I know that's been on you guys as a staff. That's what's driving you. And it's in there, and you guys see it, and you're appreciative of the sports you've had. But it's that connection there that I think is like, it's what's driving you guys here each and every day here in the summer.
There's no question. I mean, it wasn't the year we wanted to have. We know why. We've identified it. It's one of the reasons I think experience matters, is to be able to identify where issues are and then address them accordingly. We feel like we've done that in the off season, but there, there was such a. That was Coach Nagy, and that was Coach Nagy, myself, certainly D. Red and Tay. That was all of our first experience. Javon and J Mac and Coach Veasley, they've been to Arch Madness before, and so the feeling that is in St. Louis, that was something we were all experiencing. The rest of us were experiencing for the first time, and then when we went to that event. There's so much excitement, so much Saluki excitement that was going on at that event. When we walked out of there, you're exactly right. Coach, I remember what you're talking about, and it was a chilly walk. I remember that too. It was cold. I don't know why we had ice cream in our hands, but
because it was good.
It was good. You could tell by my belly. I probably should have eaten a little too much ice cream, but he did. He said, we got to get this thing going, and we know exactly. It's really difficult to explain to fans or whatever frustration that anybody may feel like it. What losing does to us as coaches, it impacts our health, literally. It has bothered my health through the years, and so mental and physical. And so there's nobody, and I know with Coach Nagy it's the same way, and a lot of the other coaches. So, our desire to get this thing up and going for everybody, our own mental health, because when you win, I've been a part of NCAA tournaments before. When I was at Western Michigan, we've won MAC championships, won 8 MAC West titles. When you win, I've always said this, all it allows you to do in the off season is lead a normal life. You can eat, you can sleep, you can walk around, you don't hide from people. When you lose, you just miserable. It's just a miserable summer. You just can't wait to get back to the first game next year. And when, it was the first year, we know we got plenty of support. Everybody's waiting to see what we're going to do with the program. We know that, but to not be able, or the desire to bring this level of excellence that has been come to be accepted here or expected, that's something that we want to get to and get to it immediately.
Coach Hawk, appreciate the time. Looking forward to the rest of the summer with you.
You got it, Luke. Appreciate it. Go Dogs.
Once again, that was Steve Hawkins. We got more coverage coming up with Saluki basketball here in the summer of 2025.